it's orange and blue tonight as opposed to today. Now, normally we're on the Denver Sports digital channels, 3:30 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Right.
YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. But we had a lot to say. As you like to say, we're chatty blankety blanks.
That we are.
And when we spent today listening to Greg Penner, Sean Payton, and George Payton for 58 minutes today, there's a lot to chop up from this show.
Yes, a lot to chop up, and Andrew Mason is here with me. We're going to do that, and we're going to start with the door being open. Now, we did do 30 minutes on this on Orange and Blue today, but the door is open, but how much open, Mace? You and I both think they're saying what they need to say, basically.
They're saying, when they're saying the door is open for Russell Wilson to come back and accept a restructure, to accept terms that have been defined. The question is, what motivation is there for Russell Wilson to do that? Really, the only motivation would be if, and we know there's tampering, there are feelers put out. The only motivation would be if Russell's team goes out and finds that nobody is interested in him as a starting quarterback, that there isn't going to be a Pittsburgh or an Atlanta or a New England that would offer him the chance to be the starter, in which case he might be left with, okay, if I want to be a starter, got to make it work in Denver.
Right. That's the only way, and I don't think that's the case. I think there will be interest. We got plenty to say about that, but Sean Payton started off his press conference essentially saying, we're going to take a week before we get into talking about our own players or even our own staff.
Interesting.
Now, I am the one who said in week 3 Vance Joseph would be fired. He was not fired, Mace. Everyone knows that. Is he safe? I want to say he's safe, but is he safe? They're the number 30 overall defense. I can't say assuredly he's safe. And when Sean Payton opens the press conference, he's like, we're going to take a week before we look at our own staff. I was like, well, what does that mean?
They're number 30. One of the things I plan on doing here in the next few days is going back around the league and looking at everyone's defensive metrics if you drop the high and drop the low.
Okay. That's fair.
So drop the two outliers, right? Like, Jacksonville's defense was a sieve down the stretch this year. That's why they blew out their entire defensive staff.
Right.
They pitched a shutout against Carolina in Week 17, but Carolina had a terrible offense, right? I mean, so that'd be the kind of thing where you say, okay, that's an outlier result. 70 definitely is a massive outlier, but if you drop the high, you drop the low, that means you're dropping 70, but you're not dropping 42. And that was against a Broncos defense at closer to full strength. And Detroit did a lot of the same things Miami did.
Right.
And that did come up today to George Payton, asked about the speed and countering the speed of Miami and Detroit, because it was clear that that level of skill position, talent, and dynamism was a bridge too far for the Broncos to handle.
Right.
They didn't have the personnel to deal with it.
They didn't have the personnel to deal with it, and honestly, I don't know exactly how all that's fixed, and that's why Greg Penner said, Broncos country, we understand your frustration, and there's going to need more patience is going to be needed. I'm paraphrasing, but that was one of the vibes today, because it's like there's so much to fix, and honestly, in ways, I'm going to say this term, Mace, don't throw anything at me.
I have a glove. I can throw a glove at you. It's pretty harmless.
I said, good day, sir. I think in ways they got a little bit lucky. I've talked about the injuries. They were kind of injury-free. They kind of got lucky in some aspects.
Well, you and I have talked about this on the digital show, how, they had that 5-game winning streak, and they lost some close games. They lost close early to Las Vegas and Washington, of course. But they won close games, too. You could argue this team, could have had a chance against Houston as well. Certainly had a chance against New England. They're a few breaks away from being 12-5. Sean Payton alluded today, they're a couple of breaks away from being in the opposite direction. I mean, you beat Minnesota by 1. Green Bay, if not for a holding call,
right,
the Packers probably drive to a game-winning field goal there at the end. Buffalo, you need too many men on the field in order to get the reprieve that allows you to escape from Orchard Park with a win. So there you have right there 3 games. And the Chicago game, you had to come back from 28-7 down in the second half, and the defense, which had been maligned, actually was able to make a couple of explosive plays to help get you back in it. You could just as easily have been 4-13 as 12-5, right? You can probably say that 8 wins is about where they should have ended up, but it's 8 wins with some very good injury fortune.
Yeah, very good injury fortune. And then the turnover rate that this defense have had, Mace, you and I said it as it was happening, this is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. I publicly apologized to Vance Joseph, and I still stand by that, right? I still apologize to Vance Joseph, but I'm like, okay, without those turnovers and that magical run, you said it hadn't been done in how many years?
It had been 16 years.
16 years. Yes.
You had to go back to 2007 for the last time a team had recovered 10 fumbles in 4 games. Okay, that's the very definition of outlier result.
Right.
And that was that was making it, and that was what was making it happen. Because fumbles on average, the team that fumbles is going to get the ball back about 53% of the time, right? So you're looking at a pretty close to 50% either way. The Broncos, on the other hand, I think they recovered like 2/3 of the fumbles in those games. That's not something you do ordinarily.
Yeah, it was an amazing clip by the Denver Broncos defense. How do they, recoup that or get back on that track? We'll see. The most shocking thing today, and I'm not even being a smartass, which is better than being a dumbass when I say this. The most shocking thing today was Sean Payton admitting he did something wrong.
Called the wrong play.
Yeah, it's refreshing. I'm glad Sean did that, and it was kind of odd that he did that.
He admitted to calling the wrong play. He did say on the timeouts, referring to the timeout call at the end of the first half in Las Vegas on Sunday, and then the timeouts against the Patriots when they were trying to get the ball back.
Right.
He did say he would have done that 99 times out of 100. And look, this is one of those things where you sometimes make decisions based on trusting your team. Okay, I trust my defense to get the ball back. When New England, against New England in Denver, turned out, Pat Surtain got beat by Devontae Parker. That was the explosive play that gave the Patriots the win, basically.
On a 3rd and 3.
The Vegas one, I could say, was probably more egregious of a failure because Vegas was trying to run down the clock to halftime, right? They were trying to just make sure that they didn't turn over the football and give the Broncos prime field position. They were trying to run 3 plays, almost certainly on the ground, to force the Broncos. They burn the last time out, run the rest of the clock, get to halftime at 10-7. And then you get that explosive run right up the gut, run defense, a problem for the Broncos all year, especially in the core, the inside linebackers and the defensive line. And lo and behold, they get out of the shadow of the goalposts and okay, let's take this for a spin. And they start driving down the field.
Yeah.
Right. I actually don't mind Sean Payton's call with the timeouts there. I think it's because at some point you do have to trust your team. And they let down. Now some may say, "Oh, you've got to know what your team is." Your defense had been pretty good for a while this year. I mean, going into, obviously you played the Chargers without Justin Herbert, but you just allowed the Chargers 9 points the previous game. You expect a team going up against Aiden O'Connell and no Josh Jacobs to be able to get stuff.
Yeah,
and they didn't do it.
That's the thing. You're going up against a Raiders team that isn't that good, and Sean Payton alluded to this as well. We're breaking down what Sean Payton said because he said a lot. He did kind of ramble a little bit. I think we got more from George Payton, but Sean said, I'm just getting used to the AFC. So part of it is knowing your team, and part of it is being used to your opponent and the way that they play your team. That Raiders-Broncos game, regardless of their records, almost sometimes you just throw them out because that's a rivalry game, even if both teams kind of stink or are kind of mediocre like they were this year.
Getting used to that, though, I mean, aren't there an awful lot of coaches who just stepped right in and did fine and didn't have that time to get acclimated
With
the new division.
By the time zone thing. Didn't he bring up time? He brought up a lot. He was wandering.
He brought up the whole thing of going east.
Right.
Part of it is you can get settled in one place for so long that when you do make a change, there reaches a point where it becomes jarring. Like if you're a coach and you're someplace for 4 years and then you go another place for 4 years, the change is something to which you become accustomed. And that's life for an assistant coach. And it's even life for a lot of head coaches. But Sean Payton stayed in New Orleans for 16 seasons, okay? I mean, he was a generational coach for that franchise.
Right.
How many coaches last that long with one stop anymore? I mean, Bill Belichick, and that
Mike
may
Tomlin.
be over. Mike Tomlin just finished year 17.
Right.
Yes. But most of the time you're turning it over quickly. So it's almost like if you can get too used to being in one place. I think it was Steve Spurrier on the college level who said basically about 10 years is the shelf life.
Okay.
I believe Bill Walsh said something similar as well when he was coaching the 49ers. And maybe that's also the case in the NFL. Maybe if you stay on a job too long, you get too accustomed to things, and then that leads to, it's pretty jarring to be in the Mountain Time Zone, and
right,
be in the AFC West, and now you're going east for these long road trips instead of your long road trips requiring you going west, right?
Right. It's interesting with Sean Payton because Greg Penner is professing patience, and Sean Payton isn't patient. You mentioned 10 years. I don't think he's here 10 years. And we talk about, like, what rookie quarterback and patience, and it might take a couple years. Like, yeah, that's fine. I get that. That's what we kind of have to say. But I don't see Sean Payton just sitting around being like, you know what? In 2029, we're going to be great.
Well, another thing. I think he wants to genuinely, when he does move on, whenever that happens, I think he genuinely wants to leave things in better shape than he arrived.
Isn't that already there? I mean, basically, when he arrived, things were pretty bad. The low point of this franchise.
Kind of like more sustainable. And I'll give you kind of an example. We all know Sean Payton is a Bill Parcells protege.
Yes.
That's not the only person who influenced him, but Parcells certainly has a big impact working with him in Dallas for those years before Payton went to New Orleans. Parcells coached the Cowboys, I believe 4 seasons, 03 to 06. When he came in there, it was a franchise that was in decline. When he left them with a quarterback who'd basically be the starter for a decade, Tony Romo. The Cowboys didn't go to Super Bowls with Tony Romo, but they were pretty successful.
Didn't they
for
go
a
to
while.
the playoffs with Quincy Carter? Am I misremembering
with
that?
Bill Parcells.
With Bill Parcells.
Yes.
Yeah.
03.
Mm-hmm.
Parcells did kind of the same thing in New England. He moved on after the 96 season. Remember the famous thing, if they're going to tell you at the Super Bowl, he says, if they're going to ask you to make the meal, they ought to let you shop for the groceries. And Parcells moved on to the Jets. Patriots went to the playoffs the next couple of seasons after that with Pete Carroll as a head coach. He left the Patriots in better shape. He left the Jets in better shape. I think that means something to Sean Payton as well, that when he's gone, you can still have a competitive operation. Now, that being said, as far as the timeline, it's interesting on quarterbacks. I think we can agree Michael Penix Jr. probably plays sooner rather than later, wherever he goes.
Yes, I'd almost start him week 1, but by week 5, 6 at the latest.
Okay. J.J. McCarthy. He may require the Jordan Love timeline.
I don't want to see him for 2 years.
Right. They're just at different phases in their development. Rough night for Michael Penix Jr. under duress, under a lot of pressure. The body of work says Michael Penix Jr. is more ready for the NFL than J.J. McCarthy.
Yes.
And where that comes into play is if the Broncos do draft a quarterback at number 12, or at some point, whether they trade up, trade down, whatever, it's probably more likely to be Michael Penix Jr. or Bo Nix than J.J. McCarthy, just because of those two quarterbacks being far closer to pro-ready than McCarthy is.
Yes, and pro-ready is almost like when people say we're going to have kids when we're ready. You're never ready.
You're never ready.
You're never ready. But experienced is something that they are, and we know with Michigan, when you can hand the ball off and run the ball like that, makes things a little bit easier for McCarthy. Plus, I think there's this exaggeration of quarterbacks. Mace, we see it every year. Sometimes it starts at the Senior Bowl, where you get this just exaggeration. You know, like
Mhm.
Brandon Whedon was never a first-round graded player. I don't have McCarthy graded as a first-rounder. I could totally be wrong. He'd be the best ever or whatever. But it's like, I think we get this inflation because it's not a quarterback-driven league. It's a quarterback-desperate league.
Could McCarthy be ready in a year?
So if he comes out 2025, like,
yes. I mean, the
could he be a
assertion,
first-rounder
the
then?
assertion that Joel Klatt had last
Yes,
week
yes.
is that he believed McCarthy should go back to school for another year.
Needs some more seasoning, yeah.
Now, if Jim Harbaugh moves on to the NFL, quite possibly in the AFC West,
Most likely
Yes.
in the AFC West, wouldn't you say?
I'd say so.
Raiders or Chargers?
Yep. If it's the Raiders, there's a pretty good chance J.J. McCarthy goes with him, with Aiden O'Connell probably as a bridge year quarterback. He looked fine as a bridge.
Not a bad bridge. He's
No,
better
no.
than Jarrett Stidham.
He was the better of the two quarterbacks on Sunday.
Sure.
No doubt.
Yep.
Although both of them had their issues. Like, they both missed some pretty makeable throws in
Yes.
that game. Like, I'll admit there was one moment sitting in the press box that I turned to the person sitting next to me and I said, these quarterbacks are just kind of mid the way they're playing today.
It wasn't BK, was it?
No, but he's
No.
very special.
He is very special. Yeah, well, it's a bridge for them, but imagine the AFC West if you have Jim Harbaugh anywhere, Chargers, Raiders, whatever, and then a first-round quarterback. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the Broncos, you need some sizzle, man. You need some sizzle.
But if Harbaugh goes to the Chargers, then it becomes interesting because
Yes.
there's no room for McCarthy at that end. Harbaugh is riding Justin Herbert, which you should do.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Yes,
right.
exactly. And, Herbert has been let down by an awful lot of factors so far
Yes.
with the Chargers.
Yes, and he's actually even shown a little bit more emotion, something that coming
Mm-hmm.
out at the Senior Bowl, I remember hearing some in the scouting community be like, oh, he's kind of to himself, and this was seen as a downgrade. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
he's really reserved. He only hangs out with his brother. And I'm like, okay, the NFL is all for different strokes for different folks, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, what is this? Like the movie Draft Day? Like, how many people showed up to Bo Callahan's birthday party?
Right. The questions that we have about the Denver Broncos and their future revolving around Russell Wilson. I was a little sick of the Russ questions. Once they put up their front of this is how we're going to answer this,
Mm-hmm.
George Payton was asked 3 or 4 questions about Russ. Sean Payton was asked 3 or 4 questions about Russ. Greg Penner was asked a couple, 3 questions about Russ. I love our brethren in the Denver media, but I thought the questions about Russ, once they established that front of how they were going to answer it, it was a football decision.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it. I know that's probably not the case, my opinion, but they're not going to tell me any different no matter how I structure the question.
But you understand that sometimes the effort has to be made.
You have to get the quote.
Yes. And sometimes, like, it's a little bit of a strategy that, okay, if it's asked enough different ways, eventually you're going to
Okay.
have that wall come tumbling down,
Right.
right? I get that. At the same time, I tend to be one that says, okay, like, if it's not going to go here, I want to ask a question that will actually provide some usable information going forward, which is why in the middle of one of those bursts of Russ questions, I admit I kind of, went off the path, and that's when I asked George Payton about this year's draft class, which I thought revealed an answer that was much more interesting than anything that was said regarding Russell Wilson today.
I think it revealed an answer about what they're going to do with Lloyd Cushenberry. I believe it revealed an answer about what they're going to do at cornerback opposite Pat Surtain. I think that answer to your question revealed a lot, maybe even more than George wanted us to reveal.
Yes. And when you're identifying Riley Moss, Drew Sanders, and Alex Forsythe, who did not play a snap in the regular season,
Not one.
inactive all year, and all 3 of them identified by George Payton as starters in this league.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt Paradis didn't play as a rookie.
He was
on the
practice
practice
squad,
squad, right?
Yep, and they stepped in the 2015 season.
So we've seen this before.
Yes. And it's actually we've seen it before here. It's not an uncommon way of developing a center to have that first year effectively be a classroom year, which makes sense because there's so much cerebrally on the plate of a center coming into the NFL. So much they have to do pre-snap.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that he mentioned those players and knowing that at two of the positions you have prominent players hitting free agency. Because Drew Sanders, they worked him at edge as the season went on. That got him on the field. Long term, they'd still like him to be an inside linebacker.
He was drafted as an ILB.
He was drafted as an ILB who brings some pass rush ability and can project to having coverage ability because of his length, speed, and quickness.
Yes. And we see what Alex Singleton does as a blitzer sometimes.
Yeah.
Imagine a guy that's got more length and is faster. You know, now you're getting the quarterback faster, and he should be able to cover. He's also a really smart player. Like, I think his head was swimming this year. He kind of didn't know what he was doing at times, but I don't think he lacks intelligence or even football intelligence.
Yeah, the football intelligence is going to be the key thing there. And so that's a move. I think by saying Riley Moss is a starter in the NFL at corner, I didn't think the Broncos were going to be hot and heavy in the free agent market. If worst comes to worst, you can bring back Fabian Moreau on a vet minimum contract. Obviously, he did struggle down the stretch after playing pretty well at midseason, but he's probably still going to be on the market in May or June if you realize, we need to go bring him back. Kind of like you do with Cam Fleming year after year, right? You see what's on the market. He's still there. Let's bring him back as a swing tackle, right?
And he'll be happy to come back.
Yes. But in light of that, and then George Payton talking about how there's a plan for dealing with the dead money hit that you would take if you move on from Russell Wilson.
We totally are not making that plan yet, but we've got a plan.
He called it extreme. And indeed it is extreme because
it's totally extreme.
Even if they split it over 2 years, the second year hit will still be the single largest dead money hit in a single year in NFL history, exceeding Matt Ryan for the Falcons back in 2022.
Okay.
And if they took it in 1 year, it would more than double the Matt Ryan dead money hit.
Right.
It's really interesting because you can kind of see some changes coming into play. And by the way, George Payton doing his usual thing. We like having draft picks. Look to have more draft picks. How do you get more draft picks?
Trade away players.
And you may have to do that in order to get this thing right regarding the salary cap.
So that means get ready, Broncos country, if you have to say goodbye to some of your favorites. You may be watching us on YouTube. If you are, help us grow our YouTube channel. How do you do that, Mace?
Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid.